procedures and so on for medicine is something that I bring to this work. Among the most active of informal communication networks in our society today are ones that circulate tips about good and not so good doctors, ones that help us decide which specialist to approach for an ailment or choose between available medical facilities. And these networks also provide advice on how, as a patient, one manages an illness or a surgery. And if you are not part of a network like this, you really should quickly get onto one. Medical personnel themselves may also be participants in this sub-scientific gossip that circulates illegitimately in the world of professional authority and scientific knowledge. It is significant that my own experience as a user of medical care over these globalizing turn-of-the-century years is one of increasing insecurity and increasing reliance on such traditional networks. Is this a regress into a pre-modern sensibility on my part? Or is it a way of coping with some of the contradictions of medical care as it actually exists today? Consider this example. A number of my friends and I were victim to the estrogen replacement therapy wave. All of you will remember it. It cost some of us our lives. Today, as I move into a period of my own life in which I will need medical help more than I ever did earlier, I fear going to a doctor or a hospital. I know there is expensive machinery that has to be paid for, medical units that need experience with complex surgery and new procedures, a dispensation that rapidly translates my discomforts into formats for which the latest treatments can be offered. And in addition, there are drugs from companies that may have subsidized the doctor's clinic or participation in an international seminar, and a growing medical culture of normativity in which deviance, any deviance, physiological or emotional, is at risk of being pathologized. Most of all, I fear being swallowed up in a logic that does not have my well-being at its heart. I feel I have to check and cross-check everything: doctors, drugs, procedures, diagnoses, and that I have to strategically counter-manage medicine from my end. And all the time I know I can never do this well enough to protect me. As a pensioner, I fear the cost of all this. Only when I began working on this project did it strike me that medicine in its neoliberal market form has gifted me, middle-class elite, an experience that was commonplace for most Indians. I now feel a new empathy with being hit by wave upon wave of selective public health programs that come and go with their own logic. Estrogen replacement therapy hit me, but many other programs like this hit ordinary Indians all the time. Malaria control, family planning, ICDS-style child nutrition, dogs, and so on. Each program makes demands, but has little concern for the actual context of the ordinary lives in which it is put to practice. And it has no relief at all for the actual ailments that its targets may be suffering. So if there's tuberculosis control, DOTS comes in, the targets may be hungry, poor, malnourished. The program can't really cope with that, or many other things. Who knows? You can have diabetes as well. Given my elite position, targeted public health programs have generally passed me by. But today, when the medical market targets consumer populations, when state-of-the-art tertiary medicine redistributes its patients into dossiers of test results, standardized treatment protocols, and expert opinions to which they have little to contribute, today, as a free consumer of this free market healthcare, I too am gaining a feel of what it means to be a target. Taking a leaf from an ordinary Indian's book of common knowledge, I now search carefully for medical services I can trust a little more. Maybe because I have a family connection with them, or because the doctor or even the attendant comes from my mohalla, belongs to my caste, and knows and understands my situation better. Most importantly, I look for doctors and hospitals that have some kind of oblique relationship to the current dispensation and are known for their commitment to caring for ordinary people who are their patients. I fear, like Kamala does, that this is a species that may be dying out. So that's the small experiential statement. The key point that I'm making there is that a privileged position that I had earlier on as maybe an urban elite person who had some control of the consumption of medicine. That key position now is being completely redistributed as I begin to feel like a target of the new medical facilities, corporate healthcare, whole body testing procedures, etc., etc., etc. A target that makes me feel much more intimately connected with the way public health programs were run in our country earlier. And this is therefore a critique both of the new system of clinical care and of the old public health programs which still continue in a new format. They're not different. What is my argument? And there are two new things that I'm saying in this essay. One is, we tend to think of clinical medicine and public health as two completely different formations. Clinical medicine is regarded as scientific, related to an individual, directed at a single body, and as embedded in a specific doctor-patient relationship. That's a one-to-one relationship. Public health, on the other hand, is a huge administrative initiative. It will be along select programs. We have very little primary health care which is holistic. Public health is along, so today we have nutrition programs, we have tuberculosis programs, we have AIDS programs. There are specific lines along with public health. And public health programs are designed to, they're a bit like eminent domain in the land acquisition discussions that we have today. They're designed to improve the health of the nation. And you're never quite sure what this nation is, because clearly the people who are being given DOTS, which is a very strong, it's a chemotherapy actually, medication for tuberculosis, are nearly all reeling from this medication. But we all know that it will safeguard the country from tuberculosis. And so we have to think about what is this country that is being addressed in the big public health programs. So my argument is, and this is an argument from now taken also from some other scholars who worked on modern medicine. The argument is that though we tend to think of clinical medicine and public health programs as completely different, actually, structurally, all medicine is a public health program. Why do we argue this? Now it's like saying nothing exists which is in the format of clinical medicine. Clinical medicine is actually dealing with a single case in what is a huge public health style program that is designed for it. I'll try to explain what I mean by this. If we look historically, histories of modern medicine will write the history as though this is a series of inventions that have taken place and where science is advancing and that newer ideas are coming up and therefore treatments are improved. But if we look more closely and we ask ourselves, what is the structural setting? Not just what is the individual story, but what is the structural setting in which modern medicine emerges? And you see quite clearly that when you look at Europe, it is epidemic control, public health, administrative initiatives in hygiene, sanitation, the burial of the dead, the provision of water, the control of epidemics treatment. This is really the cradle in which modern medicine begins to emerge. And that's, if you look 19th century, early 19th century, late 18th century, that's the period in which, in huge administrative initiatives, we're getting the beginnings of what are called modern medicine. There is research programs that go along as well, but you see that these research programs in malaria, programs about malaria, about cholera, on big diseases as well as ideas of nutrition and so on, come from within this administrative setting. And the overall administrative formation of medicine actually structures the way clinical medicine is transacted. What are some of the implications of this? Well, when we have activists working with medicine, a very good example is the notion of health. All right? Nobody knows what health is. If I say to you, what is health? You can't define it. And the very fact that we can't define it leads us to think about the idea that health is not a personal attribute. Health is actually an administrative phenomenon. You look to the health of a people. So it's a set of indices, a paradigm in which you understand what medicine or medical intervention should be. So the notion of health itself is one of the most deep-set governmental notions that govern medicine or medical ideas themselves. The idea that we're talking about health of a nation, the health of a population, and so on. Now the big debate in medicine today is, or in the social debate about medicine today is, has the corporatization or the privatization of medicine actually vitiated it? Has it led to some problems? Or has it improved medicine? And the assumption there is that there is a total difference between the old state-invested medicine, which is what happens, the European countries have a state-financed and a state-led medical program, and many of us who are in the health activism field feel it would be wonderful for us to have a state insurance or a state-financed public health program that was available to everybody. Right? I still believe this. But the argument here, the argument I'm making in this paper is that whether it is in the corporate mode or whether it is in the statist mode, the very structure of medicine, if we look historically, and this is Histories in the present, is statist, it is governmental. I gave you a little bit of an example of why we, the group that I'm working with, are making this argument. But you can also see the governmental format of this medicine today if you look at how medicine decides on the effectivity of a drug. So you test it out on the population and you decide whether a certain, how effective is it? Is there's a placebo population and there's a standardized procedure through which it's done. And there are huge medical tests. India is one of the countries where large number of drugs are tested out, procedures are tested out. We have a very big medical group of medical personnel available, and we also have a very big population available. So at the moment, we are the hotbed of all this kind of medical testing that takes place. Now, the very idea of testing out drugs and procedures and so on and how it's done assumes the kind of relationship between the individual and the procedure that is a governmental kind of relationship. These are targets, populations that you study and that you look at and that you calibrate the medicine for that target or that population. Now, if you look at how drug companies, two things are happening today that are very, very important for an understanding of how this system of medicine is working. One is the whole commercial medical system is very keen on government programs of medicine. And this includes medical insurance. The reason for this is quite simple. They would like to sell to a single governmental window a large amount of drugs. Right? So if you have a vaccine, if you can say, for cervical cancer, we need to vaccinate the whole country. Right? All the women are at risk. Okay? Then the company that makes this cervical cancer vaccine has made it for that. The population of India is not a small number, and if the government buys it from them, then that it is the biggest commercial success. So there is a vested interest even from commercial medicine to retaining the governmental form of medical practice. We're seeing this also in this big battle that took place between the health minister, or she wasn't the health minister at that point, but she was women's welfare minister, about giving nutritional supplements for school lunches. So the idea was that you have a biscuit in which you put all the vitamins and you put all the trace elements that you require, some calcium and something else, and you said you give this biscuit in the school lunch program, and the argument was that it's much more efficient, it's clean, it can be delivered, there's so many problems with the hot food. So you were able to replace the idea of food with the idea of nutrition. Okay? And nutrition can be sold as a package. And if the government buys your packet of nutrition, you know what the scale of the profits are. But there are other forms as well in which we're looking at the statist form of clinical medicine. And you can think about it as, I was interviewing the head of Apollo Hospitals for this paper, and he was very pleased to be interviewed by me. Let me tell you, he felt that an academician coming to interview him, he had really made it in life. And he said that he claimed that something called the whole body test was what he had invented and which was now being exported world over. This was India's contribution to world medicine. Now, doctor friends of mine who I trust tell me never go for a whole body test. Number one, never go, some of the more radical ones will say to you, for any diagnostic kind of testing, which is like to preclude everything. Now, every year you're supposed to go and get yourself checked out. Nothing is wrong with you, they say don't go. Okay? Don't go and invent a disease for yourself. So what about whole body testing? Now you know that if a motor car garage says free test for your car, and you take your car and you think very nice, they will check it out and I can find out what's wrong with it. They are bound to find 10 things wrong with it which they can fix. Okay? And if you go in for a whole body test, then we guarantee every person in this room that you will find something wrong with you. Right? And preferably you will find some chronic problem wrong with you. It may be that you're too tall or you're too short. Some chronic problem wrong with you, for which you will have to stay on medicine all your life. And for which you will have to keep coming back to use the testing machines and all of this whole paraphernalia that there is. Alright? And you can even, when one is dying, today you have to pay a death tax to the corporate hospital because there's no other way that you can peacefully pass away unless your relatives are really, really strong and insist that they will give you a death of dignity. So we're seeing how the corporate privatized, apparently highly individualized medical system is feeding off and connecting with the earlier state-led, state-formed, administratively structured health system. And this is one part of my argument, that there is a continuity between the new corporate health and the old state. So that if we are saying, as health activists, we should be going back to the state-led health system, then there are two problems with it. One is that system didn't deliver very well, and the second is we're still in it despite the fact that we're buying it with private money rather than with state-supported money. So that's one of the arguments I'm making, that there is, all medicine is actually administratively structured, and that administrative structure of medicine, the state structure of government or state structure of medicine, actually feeds into the convenience or easy way in which it translates into the market format. The second argument that I'm making here is somewhat related, and that argument is that the state format of medicine, the governmental format of medicine, is now so deeply established that it is embedded in the structure of medical knowledge itself. That the structure of medical knowledge is a governmental structure. Now, there's a problem always in making sweeping statements like that, and it's like as though, okay, we have now this governmental medicine, and there's nothing you can do about it. What calamity is it? However, one of the things that makes it possible for us, one of the things that becomes possible when you think about it in this way, is also to think about how do work change, or how is it possible to think about transforming the system. We spent a lot, the group that I was working with were partly doctors. There were half of them were doctors working in a big medical college, hospital, so they were medical educators as well as practitioners. And the rest of us were feminists, social scientists, cultural theorists, that kind of group of people who were interacting between these two. And when we came up against this thing, they said, the doctor said, you know, your analysis is so depressing. It's as if everything we're doing is shit. It's as if, you know, we can't have no actual relationship with our patients, and that everything, you know, it's like you feminists say everything is corrupted by patriarchy, but does no one ever have any relationship with a man, and so on. Okay? So this is a very, very interesting philosophical question, that if you are in a structure, then how does one move that structure, or is the structure completely definitive? And we began to develop what I think is a very interesting theory of practice, which again connects with the work that Kamala was talking about, and which I found fascinating, and I would like Kamala to come and speak to us about it as well. We're always taking a structure and performing it in one way or the other. All of us. Think of the simplest example, a language. We know that language is a grammar, we know that there are also other kinds of grammars of gestures, or body formations and so on that we all work with. But every time we get dressed in the morning to come and give a lecture here, there is a performance of all that grammar that is involved. And those of you who are theatre artists know that no performance is identical with the text. Yeah. That the text is there, but the performer does something else with the text. The performer doesn't lose track of the text, doesn't go away completely. Okay. But the demands of the performance are both larger and smaller than the text. So how does this map on to the question of medicine? The mapping is something like this. Medical knowledge is like a dramatic text, right? It's like the text of a play. And every doctor and every medical practitioner is also performing that text. He's not just applying that text. It's not just medical knowledge that I studied in school or whatever it is and I bring it and I just... There is a completely demanding, compelling transaction between the public health official and the location in which he or she is, the actual clinician, the surgeon, and the patient in front of him. Now, a skilled doctor, a good doctor, is a doctor, and this was something that the clinicians all agreed with. He looks at his patient and says, I can tell what this patient can afford and cannot afford. I will have to think about a suitable treatment, given this array of treatments that I have, for this particular person. Now, today's medical knowledge, which is very drug company directed, is saying no. You have to give every patient the full range of choices that are available, and obviously you will put it in such a way that the most expensive drug is the most suitable or the best drug or whatever. But doctors who actually practice in circumstances where large numbers of their patients will be completely impoverished, and we know from our figures that medical bills are the greatest source of indebtedness in this country, that doctors make these decisions about what kind of treatment, what can be offered, how do you think about this situation and what is possible or not possible. And the idea that this comes under the title of practice is something that practice is something that needs to be looked at and theorized, was a very important breakthrough in the thinking that we did. So, what are we saying? We're saying that in India, on the one hand, there is this huge standardization and corporatization of medicine. There's a huge profiteering and completely unethical kinds of practices that are taking place. It is a hotbed of evil, if you want. I never rarely use a word like this, but that's what is the way of describing what medicine has become. And my fear, when I said I fear as a pensioner to go to a hospital, it's a very genuine fear. I wasn't putting it on or anything. Okay. That's on the one side. But on the other side, in every mohalla, in every small hospital, you will find actual practitioners, doctors, nurses, public health workers, ayahs, and so on, actually practicing medicine in a way that's different, that is connected to the people they are responsible for, accountable to, and so on. And the suggestion I'm making at the end of this paper is that we have a huge body of knowledge in Indian medicine, which is the body of knowledge of practice, what people are actually doing, that needs to be not just documented, but documented, analyzed, used as the basis for what we would consider a meaningful, viable medicine in India. Also, a whole process through which we retool what we have received as medical knowledge, which has its own logic and its own formation, how that is actually being retooled. Unfortunately, like so many other things that we do, there is a way in which, as Indian scholars, we dismiss our own work and our own experience. Okay? My own classroom is not something that I think is the basis of pedagogic theory. Pedagogic theory always comes from some book in the library in which, it's beautifully printed and usually there's some white person's name on the top of it, even today. Maybe this will be sometimes it will be a brown or a black, actual experience, say in Africa, of using this medicine. How are doctors doing it? What are they doing? To me, this is now clearly some of the most fundamentally important work that is happening in medicine today. And I'm looking forward to some years now of trying to document this. So if you go to a little pharmacist shop, most pharmacists in India are doing a lot of illegal work. Okay? But this is illegal work that is helping many people survive in medicine. So if you say to this, if I go to the pharmacist and I say, you know, I have a headache, will you give me? He says, no, go and see a doctor, he'll say. Because he looks at me and he thinks, suspicious character. She's trying to nose something out. But even as I'm standing there, somebody else, a daily wage laborer, will come in and he will give a set of symptoms that he has, and the pharmacist will give him one tablet and say take 3 tablets or whatever it is. Now, for standard medicine, this is a corrupt practice. Okay? But we know that in India, this corrupt practice is helping hundreds of people survive. And that this is sometimes the only way people have of cutting against the new costs of medicine. So there are many strategies that people are employing. There are what we call rural medical practitioners that are there where all the endorsed medical practitioners are not there and who are doing incredible kind of work. So what is the body of the practice of Indian medicine and what is the kind of knowledge that is actually available and prevalent in this practice of medicine? I'm not celebrating all of it. I'm not saying all of it is good, but I'm saying there is a lot of work of relevance that we can gather back from practice. So that's the shape of the argument. Very briefly, to sum it up, the argument is that if we look at medicine historically, then we are looking at a state medicine directed at targeted populations. Now the targeted population may be targeted for malaria control, but it also may be just targeted for diabetes. It's called, the whole of medicine works through targeting specific populations. And that's how the logic has developed. That the state logic is also the statist logic of medicine is also the logic of the new corporate medicine, and that even in the one-to-one clinical relationship, what we are getting is a governmental relationship with the patient. And on the other side, the idea that, like, and those of you who are in literature, I catch one or two faces here, or in philosophy, as the shift in philosophy from understanding structures as static and as spatial to structures in performance is one that has been very important over the last 30 years or so. And this is really the shift that we're mapping onto medicine to say that what we need to be looking at if we want to understand medicine in India as an ethical practice that has possibilities for the rest of the world, then we need to be looking at the actual practice of Indian doctors, nurses, small institutions, big institutions. There are many of them. It's not that everything is steeped in this corruption. But unless we're able to celebrate this and to work with it conceptually, we're also looking at a situation where we have a wave of standardization and of increasingly, today, what is medical ethics? Today, medical ethics says, have you given the patient all the possible choices that can be given? Okay? And have you confused the patient enough? If you don't, you can actually be charge sheeted legally should that patient come back. Right? Now, none of us, even those of us who died with estrogen replacement, none of us went back to charge sheet the doctor. That's not conventions, not in practice. We also understand many things. But where is the medical ethics actually there? And that is in the kind of responsibility towards the patient that we do see in a great deal of actual practice. practitioners today who are being told that they're being unethical, that's where ethics often really lies. So that's the argument in this paper, and it's an attempt to, as social scientist, as a student of cultural studies, to go look at medicine as a whole and to try and understand some of the contradictions that we are confronted with both in our personal experience of medicine and in our analysis of public health programs and why they have failed, most of them have failed, clinical medicine, why it is inadequate and what is happening to it. Is there a way of trying to work with it, but also is there a way of shoring up and celebrating the knowledge that actually exists in the practice of people who are involved? And you know, Indians, whether we're teachers or we're doctors, we're so used to being told how bad we are and how corrupt we are and how inefficient we are. But we look around and we see each other and we don't see bad people. Okay? The people we're seeing are pretty honest, trying hard to do a good job in a difficult circumstance, and there are people also who believe in something. There's still this thing, maybe it's some residual nationalism, who knows what it is. But we believe in something. There are lots of people who do. There's some people who don't, but there are lots of people who do. So what is it that we are making out of the institutions that we work with? And I think that's something we need to work on.
I now request Dr. Tharu to release the newsletter volume of the Research Center, which was archived.
Wow, the first time I've released. And keep one for myself.
Yes, of course. Dolly Thakur to release the CDs on the posters, the poster collection. Yeah, some of them.
Oh wow, look at these. I'll keep up to myself.
Yes.
That's cute.
Thank you very much. I now request Geeta to give the vote of thanks. Oh, we are so sorry, we forgot. Oh, no, please give me the flowers now. Managing
I always love getting flowers.
I'm so worried about managing time.
So that's one morning. On behalf of Power at the outset of US, I would like to thank the Honorable Vice Chancellor for having agreed to come but having not been able to come, because I think she has conjunctivitis, I don't know. And therefore, she's not here, but I'd like to thank her for in principle having agreed to come. Professor Sushie Tharu first, those of us who saw her yesterday, saw the literary Sushie Tharu today, we saw the social scientist Sushie Tharu, and this is, I mean, to come up here and say, I have a paper, I won't read it because I know you're tired, but I will tell you the argument. Fantastic. What a performance in a cultural studies lecture. Thank you, Professor Tharu, for the lecture on medicine and government, histories of the present. Ms. Dolly Thakur for evocatively reading excerpts from our various memoirs, and we are hoping that when we actually come up to the hour-long reading recording, we'll have Ms. Thakur read it for us. Our Senior Scholar Fellowship Awardee, Geeta Seshu, Kamala Ganesh and Rohini Sani. Before I thank you, I'd like to apologize for harming you for this and that over the last 6 months. Sorry about that, but thank you for these lovely presentations and more importantly for the fantastic collections that we have. We hope that you will be part of the process of actually taking them further. To meet at this side, students who've made their own dream now to the backthroat for helping me coming to volunteer to help with the exhibition. To technical and most importantly to our own staff, and I will name them individually, to Milind Prabhupada, who's put all this technical things that has been working on it for the last 1.5 months. Veena Nene, my archivist, Usha Kaur, Sapna, Tharu, Shobha, Ruth, Shraddha, Namrata, Rekha, Arun, Manoj, Ganesh, Shweta and Shaku for being there and helping putting all the programs together, particularly this one. And to all of you for coming here, I see some important guests and thank them. Professor Rupa Shah, who is importantly starting AWA, Dr. Sunamara, Kaparia, and Professor Desai, all our key committee members, Janika, Amulina, everybody, thank you very much for being here and making this special. We hope that you will support us.